imagine this. You're 32 weeks pregnant and it's Christmas Day, and out of nowhere, a drunk driver comes plowing into you. You survive, but your baby doesn't. And the law says, well, nothing happened, nothing to see here, no penalty for the loss of your child. That's actually the state of play in South Australia at the moment. And we are one day away from fixing this through Sarah Game's loss of fetus bill. The big question hanging over this bill is, will Peter Malinauskas make sure this bill doesn't pass, or will he allow a conscience vote for his MPs? Let's find out. That's today on The Dr. Jo Show. So thank you so much for joining me again. If you're new here, please subscribe to our channel. It really makes a difference if you subscribe, and that helps our videos reach so many more people. Now, today's episode is urgent. We are talking about a bill that's going to a vote tomorrow in the South Australian Parliament. As you might recall, 2 weeks ago, Sarah Game's bill to protect babies after 23 weeks and up until birth, that failed. It failed by 2 votes, and that was devastating. But Sarah Game has decided to come back and bring to a vote a bill that she's had on the books since the start of her parliamentary term in 2022. It's a loss of fetus bill that says that if a criminal act has resulted in a pregnant woman's child being killed, then that fetus's life is recognised under the law. Now, I'm using the language of fetus. I know that that's the language that the pro-abortion side uses to dehumanise a child in utero. It is a scientific term in terms of the developmental stage of a child. So if you think about it, you go from a zygote to an embryo to a fetus to a newborn infant, to, a toddler, a tween, a teenager, an adult. These are just stages of development. And Sarah's bill, this second bill that she's bringing to a vote tomorrow, is very clear that this isn't about abortion at all, but it is recognising that if a child in utero has been killed by a criminal act, so this could be a drunk driver ploughing over a pregnant woman, as we talked about in the opening, but it could be a domestic violence situation where a pregnant woman has been pushed down the stairs or shoved or hit, and been subject to violence. She doesn't die, but her child does. And there are plenty of instances of that trauma, that physical trauma, resulting in the death of that child. So Sarah's bill recognises that if this happens, there should be additional penalties and consequences. This is the case in both New South Wales and Queensland, and even in other parts of the country that don't have a specific law addressing it, like WA, there is still a recognition that when a fetus in utero has been killed, there's additional consequences and penalties. Now, this is about violence to wanted children. You and I are on the same page that we should be addressing the violence to unwanted children as well, and that that's what we're going for here. We're going for abortion to become unthinkable. We don't want abortion to exist. We want it to end because it is violence against a child in utero. And obviously, if this bill passes, it doesn't do anything to save those close to 5,000 babies who every year are killed in South Australia through abortion. But it does recognise something, doesn't it? And it puts us, I guess, in a step in the right direction in terms of recognising the humanity of the unborn in the law. So the story that I open this video with is a true one. That's Brodie Donegan, who on Christmas Day was hit by a drunk driver. She was 32 weeks pregnant, and her child in utero, Zoe, a little baby girl, was tragically killed. Now, she campaigned for 12 years to introduce Zoe's law in New South Wales, and it finally passed. There was a lot of, I guess, concern from the abortion side around that law, and they really explicitly tried to make it very clear that this had nothing to do with abortion. This was just in these specific situations around a wanted child. Now, you and I can see how hollow that is and how stupid that is, like intellectually unrigorous it is to say, well, a wanted child results in a loss of fetus provision, but an unwanted child killed by violence, well, nothing happens to them. No recognition there. That's perfectly legal. It doesn't make sense. What magical power does being wanted have to suddenly transform you from being able to be dismembered and killed right up until birth versus actually being a subject of the law and recognised as a legal category? It doesn't add up, but I think that these laws, as I said earlier, they are a step in the right direction in terms of pointing out the humanity of the child in utero. And so with Zoe's law, it did pass the New South Wales Parliament. And in New South Wales, what that means is it's an offence to kill a child in utero through drink driving or a criminal act. There's now increased penalties, recognising that it's not just the pregnant woman that's been hurt, but the loss of a fetus. It allows the baby's name to appear on the indictment. So the criminal charge that's made against the perpetrator, the baby's name is on that indictment. So recognising that that baby existed, that baby mattered. And it allows the family to give a victim impact statement about the impact of the killing of that baby on their family. Now, we saw just a week ago a tragic situation in Hornsby where a pregnant woman who was 8 months pregnant was killed by a reckless, dangerous driver. So this, I think, was a 19-year-old man who was driving at 140 k's per hour. The pregnant woman had just gone on a final outing with her child and her husband prior to the birth of their child. It was like their new child, so it was their final outing that they'd planned to do. And as they were walking out of the car park, this driver was coming at such speed that it ploughed into the car in front of them and then killed not only this pregnant woman but also her 8-month-old child. Now, in New South Wales, because of Zoe's law, it means that that reckless driver is being charged with killing her, but also loss of a fetus. So the child in her is recognised as an additional loss, and it recognises that there will be additional penalties and consequences. Similarly, in Queensland in 2023, the government or the parliament passed a law, Sophie's Law, to recognise the life of little baby Sophie Milosevic, whose mum was in a car, heavily pregnant, a drug-affected driver slammed into that car, and, the mother didn't die, but little Sophie did, and the driver was given a $950 fine. That driver got a fine for killing a baby, and Sophie's parents campaigned from 2016 up until 2023 when this law passed, fighting for a similar law to Zoe's law to be passed in Queensland. In 2023, the Queensland Parliament passed the Justice and Other Legislation Amendment Act 2023, which is colloquially known as Sophie's Law, and it says that the destruction of an unborn child's life must be treated as an aggravated factor for sentencing, that the family of the unborn child can make victim impact statements, and that the family is entitled to a funeral assistance payment from the government. Now, this law isn't actually as strong as the law that was introduced in New South Wales, which recognised the loss of a fetus as an independent category. This just is about the sentencing of the perpetrator, of the person who did the crime. We can see that even in the first instance of when it was applied in 2024, just a year later, a 17-year-old driver who crossed onto oncoming traffic. He crashed into a car that Hayley Locasano was travelling in. She was 26 weeks pregnant and her daughter was delivered prematurely and died 30 minutes later after that crash. And when they applied Sophie's Law to that driver, the 17-year-old was charged with 100 hours community service and disqualified for driving for 6 months. And this was criticised heavily by Hayley's family, but also the proponents of Sophie's Law, who said that this just makes a mockery of the recognition of the importance and significance of that child. Because let's face it, these laws are a good thing. This is not just some kind of stunt, from Sarah Game or from myself, but in and of itself, objectively, Zoe's Law, Sophie's Law, Sarah Game's loss of fetus law, which is better than the Queensland law and better than the New South Wales one. It's stronger, and we'll talk about that in a minute. These laws objectively are a good thing because they recognise the personhood of that child. They recognise that when you kill a child, there should be additional consequences. They recognise that that's a child who has been in relationship with her mother over that pregnancy, from reacting to light and sound, to hearing the mother's voice, to tasting the mother's food, to hiccuping in the womb and sucking their thumb, to the mother feeling that child kick within her, keeping her awake at night. Any woman who has been pregnant knows that you are pregnant with a child. And so to kill that child through a criminal act should be punishable in criminal law. So these laws are a good thing in and of themselves, and we need them to pass. So let's now get to Sarah Game's bill that's going to be voted on tomorrow. So the first thing is it creates a new offence, cause the loss of a fetus. And so it mirrors Zoe's Law. It's not just about sentencing like Sophie's Law in Queensland. If someone commits a seriously violent offence, such as dangerous driving or grievous bodily harm to the pregnant woman, and it results in her baby being killed, then there's a separate penalty for the baby's death. Secondly, it recognises the baby in the law. So the families can give a victim impact statement. The baby can be named in the proceedings, in the indictment. The justice system acknowledges that there are two victims here. There's the pregnant woman and then there's her baby who's been killed. The third aspect of Sarah's bill is it doesn't actually have a gestational limit to it. It doesn't require the baby to be 20 weeks old or weigh more than 400 grams. It recognises that from the moment of conception, you've got a child with a wanted pregnancy. You've got a child that the mother and father wanted to carry to term and to birth and to raise, and to get to know into childhood and adulthood. So this bill recognises that all the way through pregnancy, there's not some arbitrary limit about viability, but all the way through pregnancy, the fetus is a child of the parents. And so the loss of the fetus is the killing of that child, and it's recognised through this bill. And then the fourth thing is that Sarah's bill will align South Australia with the rest of the country. So, we see in New South Wales and Queensland this being developed into specific separate laws on this issue, but across the country, most jurisdictions have some kind of fetal loss recognised in the law. That does not happen in South Australia. South Australia's behind. And the hope is that Sarah's bill will fix this tomorrow. So we need to address the elephant in the room. Why would anyone oppose a bill like this? So the first argument that I've heard, and I heard this on Tammy Franks when interviewed by Radio Adelaide, she's ex-member of the Greens. She left the Greens because she said they bullied her. But she indicated very strongly that, she's against the bill because of the concept of fetal personhood. So she's against mothers of wanted pregnancies for being able to have extra consequences and penalties imposed on a drunk driver or a DV situation where, she's been abused by a man. Tammy Franks is against protecting the woman in those situations. She wants the criminal to go scot-free, like the $950 fine or the 100 hours of community service. That's fine for Tammy Franks. She doesn't think it's a criminal act that the woman should be compensated for, should be recognised for. And so, I think it actually does expose Tammy. But even if we just took her argument on face value that, if we pass Sarah Game's bill, this is Armageddon for abortion laws, well, it doesn't show that, does it? The experience of other states, Zoe's law passed in New South Wales, abortion up to birth is still legal. Queensland, Sophie's law passed, abortion up to birth is still legal. It hasn't actually played out that when you pass a law like this around a wanted pregnancy, that it results in a push to change abortion laws. I mean, I think the push to change abortion laws is coming from a completely different place. It's coming from a place of we have abortion up to birth in this country for any reason, and there's very many Australians who are only waking up to that now because of the effect of our movement in reaching millions every month through socials and online. So, and so I think, that's where the push to change abortion laws come from. This is a different law altogether. The second argument that I've heard whispered from Labor circles around this is that this bill doesn't need to happen. It's redundant. A fetus is already recognised in South Australian law. Now I'm giggling because this is just a gaslight. This is just a blatant gaslight. So if we see Kayam Maher from Labor, the Deputy Premier and Attorney General, getting up tomorrow in the Parliament and trying to make this claim, we just have to see this for what it is. It is a gaslight. So Sarah Game's bill, I didn't have a hand in drafting. I didn't know Sarah back in 2022 when she introduced this bill. Good on her for having the gumption to bring it forward. But she obviously had to consult the parliamentary drafters. Now, they never let you draft a bill around something that's already addressed in the law. That's just a fundamental principle of statutory drafting. You don't draft a new law to address a problem that's already addressed via an existing law. It would waste the Parliament's time. So the fact that she worked with the parliamentary drafters to draft this law is evidence in and of itself that this is not a redundant bill. It needs to happen in South Australian law. It needs to be recognised that this is a loss of fetus when a pregnant woman has her baby killed by a criminal act. So that's the first point that we know. But secondly, if Kayam Maher and his Labor ilk want to get up tomorrow and propose Sarah's bill, they're going to have to point to a specific section in our criminal law that actually identifies the loss of a fetus, and they can't. They won't be able to do it. So really, to bring all of that to a close, there's two arguments. One is this is going to affect the law on abortion. Two, that we don't need to do this, it's redundant. Both of those are just honestly the most nonsensical, stupid arguments. So in my view, everybody should be voting for this bill tomorrow night. Now, the big question is, will Peter Malinauskas allow a conscience vote on this bill? Now, I know before I started doing the work that I'm doing, so back in 2022, when Sarah first introduced this bill. I know that a number of people wrote to Labor MPs to ask them what would their position be on Sarah's loss of fetus bill. I know that at least one Labor MP wrote back and said that Mally's not allowing a conscience vote on this issue. Now, the reason Mally wasn't allowing a conscience vote is because this term of Parliament, he has been very strict with all of his Labor ministers and also backbenchers that they're not to introduce any bill on a conscience vote issue, on a social issue. So euthanasia, abortion, prostitution, all of it. Mally's run a very tight ship this term because I guess he saw that the Marshall Liberal government really got caned in the electorate. They lost, I think it was 4 seats where Liberal MPs had supported abortion up to birth, and those seats had been lost and they were Labor gains. And so he'd seen the carnage that had happened for the Liberal Party reputationally, and he was keen to shut that down. So my understanding is that back in 2022, Mally was so determined to retain his own power rather than doing the right thing and correct this anomaly in the law and to recognise the loss to a pregnant woman when her baby's been killed by a criminal act. Rather than actually doing the right thing, he was so keen to shut this down that he just said, we're not having a conscience vote on this issue. Now, I wasn't involved back then. I couldn't call it out, but I am going to be calling it out tomorrow. So if that is actually the case, and we don't know yet, we've got 24 hours to impress upon Peter Malinauskas and Labor that if they do that, if they don't allow their members a conscience vote and they kill Sarah's bill, which isn't about abortion, it's just about recognising a pregnant woman who has her baby killed by a criminal act, she should be recognised under the law. That fetus that has been killed should be recognised, and there should be, a victim impact statement. That baby should be able to be named in the indictment. There should be additional penalties on the criminal if you did that. If Mally can't allow a conscience vote on that issue, or heck, if Labor can't actually back that as a party position, which is what they should actually do, this shouldn't even be a conscience vote. It should be a party position in favour of this law. I mean, there are no arguments against it, but if Mally can't do that, then we're going to be holding him to account for that position as well. Because the thing about it is this: in the previous debate we had about Ben Hood's bill and Sarah Games' bill, which was about abortion, Mally could kind of step back and say, oh, this is a conscience vote. This is up to the individuals in the upper house. Now, we know that he was controlling the numbers. We know that he didn't want this to progress and that his office and head office were placing a lot of pressure on Labor MPs to make sure this didn't progress. So, we saw Emily Burke and Reggie Martin and Mira El-Delwani, make sure that this bill didn't get any further. Russell Wortley, Ian Hunter. It was Labor votes. It was Labor votes that prevented this bill from progressing on abortion, right? But now, if he doesn't allow a conscience vote, then we can put that on him. This is Peter Malinauskas, the Premier of South Australia, who's actively courted a gold star from the Australian Christian lobby, which they gave him for the last election, who pretends to be Christian, pretends to care about women. But if he blocks Sarah Games' loss of fetus bill by not allowing Labor Party members a conscience vote, then we know who he really is. And we can lay this at his feet because he bears the responsibility for whether a conscience vote is allowed or not as Premier of this state. So this is going to be a true litmus test of who Peter Malinauskas really is. So what can you do? We've got 24 hours to make a difference. What I need you to do is to email Peter Malinauskas, and I also need you to email the members of the upper house because this vote is going to happen tomorrow night. Now, I'm hearing good signs from Liberals in the Parliament. They're going to be supporting this. We know the Greens are going to be against it. There's a chance Connie Benares might support it because she introduced an amendment in 2022. Now, you don't introduce amendments to bills you're not going to support. So when this was first tabled by Sarah, Connie also tabled an amendment of her own. So that's a good sign that Connie might come on board. I would imagine Jingli would come on board for this one. So I think there's going to be a lot of votes there. And, really all it would take is for Peter Malinauskas to allow a conscience vote. And at the very worst, this will tie and Terry Stevens will vote to pass the bill, or it could even pass in its own right. So remember, we were 2 votes down on Sarah Games' previous bill. If Jingli and Connie Benares support this bill, then all being equal, it will tie and Terry Stevens will support the bill to passing in the upper house. So, the next 24 hours, I need you to email MPs, call their offices, and really make sure that people know that you want this bill to pass. I've got a special email tool to make it easier for you. I'll put the link down below in the description. And obviously stay tuned over the coming days as we report what happens tomorrow night in the Parliament. So thank you for watching. Tomorrow's going to be a very important day, and we'll be looking closely at what happens in the Parliament as it it decides whether it's going to stand with women who have been violently attacked and had their own very much wanted child killed by that act of violence, or whether they're going to stand with the perpetrators to make sure that they get off and don't face the full consequences of the law. That's the decision facing the South Australian Parliament tomorrow night. That's what weighs on Peter Malinauskas' head as he decides whether to give his own members a conscience vote or even whether to support this bill as a party. And thank you for watching. That's today on The Dr. Joe Show.